Hi, I'm Ruth.
I'm Johnny.
And I'm Penny. And today we're going to be talking about a book called The Chimp Paradox, which is a form of mind management that's really accessible and easy to understand. And that's the subject of our Throw Starfish podcast today. So, Ruth, you're recently listening to...
I literally finished this hours ago.
Okay, so
as
it's
an
fresh in your
audiobook.
mind.
Yes, so I haven't actually physically read the book, but I have listened to an audiobook, and I had literally, I finished my very last chapter about 3 hours ago. So it is still sinking in, and I do feel like I want to go back and listen to it about 4 or 5 times more.
Great. And how would you describe what it's about in a few sentences?
So I think it's a book about your mind. So it tells you about some of your habits and about it simplifies very complex things around psychology. So my mum's an educational psychologist, so I've grown up around a lot of psychology and I'm quite used to it. And I'm actually very, very skeptical about these sorts of books. So I went into it when Johnny recommended it, highly skeptical, and have come out the other end recommending it to people left, right and centre. It's really interesting about the way that we sometimes set ourselves up for failure, the way that we deal with certain situations, the way that we can create good habits and destroy bad habits. It really is. It's one of those books where you kind of think, wow, there is loads of stuff going on. And there's always that bit, maybe it's on an advert or when you first read a book and it's like the first bit is like, if you read this book, it can help you do all these things. And I remember, I know exactly where I was when I heard that bit. I was sat on a train going to London listening. And in your head I'm thinking, really? Really? You really think you can do this? And by the end of the book I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, it can do all that.
He makes it so simple, doesn't he? So he describes the aspects of our mind which are linked to our brain as our computer and our chimp. Johnny, you have a really good way of describing how that process works.
Yeah, I mean, I came across it. My dad actually took me to a lecture by Dr. Peter Stevens.
Who's
Stephen Peters.
Steve Peters, is he?
Mm-hmm. Steve Peters, yeah.
He's got 2 first names and they're definitely in there, in one order or another. So I actually saw him and listened to him talk through the whole book in about 35 minutes, and it was amazing. Literally went out, my dad bought the book and I went and bought the audio book, and it's one of the best models that I've ever got an insight from for how your mind works, because obviously doing work in training, leadership, soft skills stuff, you do learn bits and pieces, but this is like a holistic view that is a really kind of simple way of laying it out that explains how you have effectively your chimp brain, which is your kind of, other people refer to it as your primeval brain or your lizard brain. But it's the more emotional side of your brain that's kind of hardwired in, that reacts in certain ways. And then you've got your human brain, which is your more rational mind.
So chimp is like basic instinct, human is logical.
Well,
is that right?
Logical's perhaps the wrong word for it. Your human is your overview, that if you took emotion out of a situation, that you would apply logic and you'd rationalise things in a way that meant that you weren't kind of going over the top. And then you also have your computer in there, which is your kind of hardwired element of sort of automation and habit forming. So the computer does a lot of things automatically, but the habit element of it is you can program your computer to do things. And basically, your human is the slowest of those. Your chimp is a lot stronger and faster. And your computer is even faster than that. So the only way that you can overcome your chimp is to program your computer by preparing for situations where your chimp takes control of you and you behave in ways that you wouldn't necessarily want to behave given a more sort of calmer, rationalised response. And the only way you can do that is by programming things into your computer to overcome them. And your chimp is much more likely to come out if you are tired or stressed or under pressure or hungry. It's a lot sort of closer to the surface and is much more likely to come out. Or if it's a stressful situation, like your chimp is that instinctive thing that looks out into the forest and back in many years ago, evolution, it's that instinctive element that looks out into the forest looking for threats so it can protect you. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's accepting that both of these things exist within you and they are often in conflict with each other.
So it's a way of thinking for controlling that chimp element.
No, you can't use the word control. It's
No,
a
you
way of
can't
managing
control it.
your chimp.
Managing.
You can't
Yeah.
control your chimp because you can't arm wrestle a chimp.
Yes, and the really interesting thing that he talks about very early on in the book is the whole idea. Your chimp is like a dog you own. Like you can't affect the dog. The dog is born with certain habits and ways that it responds. You can only train your dog, and it's about training your chimp is actually, and I think this is really useful. I'm thinking of people that I've spoke to about this book, is actually for some people they feel a lot of guilt about the way that they would automatically react in a situation, and this whole idea of actually you can't change your chimp, you can just manage it is really interesting. And I think that's one of the, for me, was one of the key messages when talking to other people about it as well, is I think lots of people don't like the way their chimp acts but feel a lot of guilt for it.
It's very basic, so it's our survival mechanism, it's also our procreation. So our chimp, if it was to run riot, would be eating everything, shagging everything, and pretty much basically keeping us safe.
Yeah, so
Or just generally, doing things without consequences. And I suppose on its most basic form, when you wake up in the morning tired, going, why the hell did I watch that 4th, 5th episode of that series on Netflix last night when I was clearly tired? Like, what point did I decide that 4 wasn't enough and I had to watch the 5th one until 3 in the morning?
or that third glass of whiskey.
Yeah, and that is your
the
chimp.
chill.
Or why when I'm trying to manage my weight and near my food intake, did I open the fridge and take something out and then go back and just go, just one more, just one more,
chocolate.
just one more. Exactly. Yeah. Why have I opened a packet of biscuits and within 10 minutes, 3/4 of it is gone? Because I didn't intend to do that. That's your chimp. And it's hardwired into your fundamental evolutionary element. So obviously, human beings were transient. They would go through long periods of not having access to food and then better times of having access to food. So we instinctively fill up on food. That's your chimp response. Oh, there's plentiful food, I will fill up on food and store it so that when we go through a period of time where we can't. But obviously now, food is accessible all the time, but we still respond in that way, and that's your chimp coming out.
And society has evolved, so we're trying to bring about, to some degree or another, and with different levels of success, the ideas of equality and, in terms of relationships, monogamousness and things that I don't actually think that's a word, monogamy. Yeah. So all of those things are actually going against our basic human instinct, but because we live in a modern society where there are expected standards and behaviours, we've obviously evolved and adapted. So how do we manage that chimp when it comes out? Because it's of detriment to us now, and I've got to stop saying the word manage. I do know that. How do we train our chimp?
Well, the interesting thing is that he then splits part of the book into different planets. So he explains kind of us and all the different things that affect our lives as like a little solar system. So you have this
The sun.
like the sun, and which are like our core values, and he describes that as if you had if your great-grandson or great-grandchild came to you and said, like, how should I live my life, and you had a minute before you die to explain that, you would explain to them your values, and they're the values that you should be living by, because they're the things that will ultimately give you the most happiness, essentially, or the things that you hold the most dear to you.
And is that the sun?
And yeah, so that's the kind of the sun. Now, as I listened to it on audiobook, there were some of the things that I struggled with to visualize because I didn't have a diagram in front of me. But essentially, there's different planets. So there's like the split planet, which is your chimp and human planet, with the computer as the moon. Maybe I'm looking at Johnny in the hope that
Something like that.
But then you also have other planets around it. So there's things to do with like success and happiness and well-being and illness and like mental and physical health, and all these different things have different planets, and you can go through and work out which are the areas you need to work on. And I think one of the key things for me that was really interesting is you kind of listen to the overview and think, okay, how does that fit in with me? And then he'll give you a good example and you think, oh, okay, so that part of it I can really relate to, or maybe in that situation actually I'd be more interested in this, but this means that I have this sort of thing I need to work on. And he calls them like goblins and gremlins, and one of them are formed before you're 8 and you can't really do anything about them, and the other ones are formed when you're older than 8 and you can do something about them.
So a good example that he gives of goblins and gremlins, and in particular the gremlin, which is that thing, that space, you know, when we've just woken up and you've got the whole going on. He's given an idea of how you can overcome or train your chimp that actually is going to enable you to get up out of bed and kickstart the computer before the chimp wakes up and starts growling at everybody.
And that was actually one of the things that Johnny mentioned in his Miracle Morning podcast when he was talking about that. Is that when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, that's where Johnny got it from. He got it from Chimp Paradox.
So there's a set procedure, isn't there? We'll make a note just to make sure that we cover that off, because that's so useful, and we are aware from the people that we talk to a common problem is getting out of bed and avoiding the urge to, resist hitting the snooze button or snapping at the first person that you see.
And there's this whole idea of monarchs and who's reigning in different situations, in the sense of who is setting the rules in a situation and how you might deal with being a leader. And honestly, we kind of sat down earlier and were like, how do we describe this in 20 minutes? There are so many little things, but it's just all about, if you're sat and thinking, why do I not do what I know is right for me? Why do I always sit and make the same mistakes? Why can I not seem to motivate myself? Why am I always, looking at things in a negative way? Then you should be reading this book, because these are the kind of all the key things that are covered in that.
And the great thing is, once you've read it, you don't end up just blaming your chimp for everything. It's that acknowledging. You've now got a language that you can work out why you're responding to different things in different ways at particular times, and gives you a really effective tool for changing that. And the change isn't instant, because it is training the chimp, and it is making sure that you're using your computer, that your human is getting the opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning the credentials of the author, in the respect that he's one of the people that Chris Hoy holds fundamentally responsible, along with obviously all his training and his coaches and his actual bike, for getting his gold medals, is the psychological training that he's got from this model. And is it Steve Peters or Peter Stevens?
Steve Peters.
Steve Peters. And also Ronnie O'Sullivan as well. Yeah. So there's a famous thing you can look up on YouTube. We'll try and find a link to it. But Ronnie O'Sullivan just gets to a point in a snooker match, and he literally gets his cue and like swings it like a baseball bat and smacks the cue ball across the table and storms out. And in his psychological training and stuff, with Dr. Steve Peters, he has no memory of that. Like, it literally, his chimp took over in just such an instant moment of anger that he just did that. And like, he's looked back at the footage and he's just like, I have no memory of that. I can see myself doing it on the footage, and I still don't have any recollection of doing it, even though there's evidence for it. And it's that ability to, this is the kind of keys and the doors that you have to work out and go through in order to do this high performance stuff. But it's also, he explains it in terms of everyday stuff. So why do you lose your temper when you're driving the car, shouting at other people? Like, why does your other half literally throw you over the edge and you go absolutely nuts at them, and then just go, actually, yeah, they probably didn't mean it like that, but in the moment I felt like I was being attacked and I needed to defend myself.
There's this whole thing about relationships, whether it's work or personal as well. And I think I've kind of listened to probably the second half of it in the last few days, knowing that we were going to talk about it today. And so do you feel very overwhelmed? So as things are getting mentioned, I'm like, yeah, there's that bit, and oh yeah. So it's kind of like, I feel like in a few weeks' time, when I've probably re-listened to bits of it and made notes, I would have digested it more. But there were parts where I was like, oh, I need to write this down, or I need to look at this. And he gives you practical, I'm a real fan of practical things, and he gives you practical questions and things to think about. And it's not just here's this book that I've thought and I'm amazing. And he actually, in his interviews, he says, like, I didn't want to write this book because everyone is different. But I do think the way that he's written it allows you to go away and think, well, how does that link to me? How do I need to look at that with my relationships? And things like, he talks about your troop. And I've always been a massive fan of that. I think the people that you spend the most time with really affect you. And he talks about it on a number of different levels, from, the people that always have your back, to the people that you have these personal relationships with, there were so many times I'm just nodding going, yes, that makes sense, or oh, I understand that. And I think if anyone that hasn't read it or thought about reading it should just even go on the website and have a look, because I think there's loads you can learn about yourself and the way that you deal with situations.
The big thing for me was I'm one of those drinkers where I can have one glass of wine and get quite drunk, or I can have 4 or 5 and not get drunk. But I'm either a happy drunk or quite an emotional drunk. And I realised, just because he does mention about alcohol, just how much that makes us lose control of our human and our computer, and that our chimp's basic instincts are more likely to be less trained, or the training's forgotten. And I found that quite useful, to the point that I now will take myself off if I'm not in happy drunk mode.
If you notice, because actually your chimp's in control. And that's the thing.
Normally...
One of the things that...
Normally Johnny notices.
Yeah, well, I do try to politely point it out, and usually if your chimp has got control, attack me. So that's one of the things
I
that...
do not attack Johnny.
In I suppose that relationship between this human and this chimp that is within you, like that the objective of the book is learning to understand and accept these things, and understanding how you relate to this idea of, like you were saying, Ruth, this idea of other people. Like we are a tribal species. Like we get our feedback and our rewards, and there's another word I'm trying to think of which will come to me, that from other people. And it's why social media is so prevalent, because we need that feedback loop and that acceptance from other people. It's hardwired into us, because that's one of how we evolved, is by learning from each other and living in communities and groups. That's how we used to stay safe. But your relationship between your human and your chimp in your mind, it's not about subduing your chimp and getting rid of it. It's about learning to understand at what point it reacts and at what point it controls, because actually your chimp effectively hijacks you in situations. And once it has done, it's basically until your chimp calms down, tires itself out, or literally gets satisfied with what's happened and stops doing what it's doing. Once your chimp is in control, it's very hard for your human to get back control.
And it talks about, places where that happens, such as public speaking, talking to colleagues, and different ways that our chimp might take over in the work environment. And I think the interesting thing for me was you start to see it in other people and the way that people interact together, and you start thinking, I'm not talking to their human, I'm talking to their chimp. And so you realise one of the things I do struggle with a lot at times is patience, often with those who are closest to me. Me and my brother sometimes can say one thing to each other and that's it, and then the next minute we can be best friends. And I realise that it's our chimps talking to each other, because we are very similar and our chimps are very similar, that it can just cause havoc. And that for me was a real interesting understanding. And now my work is to go away and think, okay, in those situations, bearing in mind next week I'm about to go and spend a week with him, actually in those situations, how do I deal with it? How do I, because actually it's not fair to say, well, he should deal with it. He should, I'm actually the older one. I should, and I've read this book and I think, right, the hardest thing now is to go away and practically put it into action.
One of the things that I have implemented really well from one of those, he's great at storytelling. What he does is he helps you understand the difference between fight and flight.
Yes.
But in its little nuances. So an example he gives is about nerves and that wanting that pressure and stress when, for example, going to do public speaking, and our whole of our body is yelling and we are trying to take control on stage, and we manage that sometimes by deep breaths, or we have some techniques, but some people are petrified, and that is fight or flight kicking in. And since I've listened to him, I have turned that into something really positive. And I don't literally, but I've now trained my chimp, so it's almost like I give the chimp a talking to beforehand, so I don't actually get into that state. And hopefully it shows through. One of the things when I'm on stage a lot is I was really poor at ad-libbing. If it was prepared presentations, it was great, but now I've just become more and more confident.
Very good at winging it.
Amazing at winging it by comparison.
Your
Still
chimp
not.
used to massively come
My
out.
chimp
I'm not
used-
going on that stage. The script isn't ready. You go on.
I told you we needed to have this ready days ago.
Yeah.
Now I go like, just give me the headlines. So yeah, it's incredibly useful, and you will take away lots from it. And I think in summary for me, it's one of the very few books where I've bought it as presents for other people. This one I downloaded the audiobook first, and then I ended up buying the book, and then I scribbled it, and then I can't remember who it is now. I lent that to somebody. I wish I'd got it back
with
now,
all your
'cause it's got
deepest,
all of my
darkest secrets in.
no secrets, like just the things if I want to flick for something, because I'm getting better at identifying when my chimp's in control, but not necessarily great at remembering what I need to do about it. So yeah, if budget allows, get the audiobook, do lots of reading up and watching YouTube videos online, and get the actual book, and don't lend it to anyone.
Well,
Until
when you
it's
lend it to
sunk
someone,
in.
make sure you've written down who you've lent it to, and agree a time period and get it back at the end of that
Yes.
time period.
Very human of you.
Yes. Well, one tries. A couple of points I'd like to pick up on there. The first one about this idea of seeing the chimp in other people and therefore not reacting, because what often happens in an argument or a situation where there's some sort of pressure or disagreement is that basically your chimps end up fighting, and that's why things escalate so quickly. And being able to just understand enough about the model and this idea of a chimp and a human, you might not like the way that the person's behaving or what they're saying, but you can at least go, this isn't you, this is your chimp that's come out because it feels attacked and they're now attacking me, which I find really useful. It kind of gives you a kind of a cloak or a shield that kind of stops some of those kind of hurtful things actually getting to you, because you can put the person to one side and understand that it's their chimp and they don't really mean it. And also when we're talking about this idea of managing a chimp and training it to do better things, that's also not just when things go wrong and it's taken over control, but it's also how you go about incentivizing your chimp, because when you're committing to doing things and want to actually get stuff done, the only way you can effectively do that in a productive way is by having both your human and your chimp on side.
Yeah, I think we've spoken quite negatively about the chimp, but it's not necessarily a negative thing.
It's about being able to do things really, really well, because you understand that in setting out your incentives and your carrots and your sticks, is you need to set them out for both your human and your chimp, and you need to nail what those things are.
And they're motivated in different ways.
And they're totally motivated in entirely different ways.
A great example of that is this going on stage change that I have experienced, because now my chimp works with me. I just take those few moments just to calm the thinking, and then my chimp works with me because it knows if I go on and deliver a good set of something, that's going to get good reports, that's going to encourage people to come back. So all of a sudden its motivation has changed, and I've noticed it's not quite there yet. I do have to remind it, but I really do look forward to the day that actually its first response is, this is a good thing to do. And I'm not sure if I ever get to that point, because I also have an inherent belief in the computer, and the computer has grown up in terms of being on its feet and presenting. That I was always taught that nervous energy is a good thing because it keeps you on your toes. So I need to work hard in reprogramming that long-held belief, because I need to trust that my chimp will serve me rather than work against me if it's got the right instructions. See,
one of the things that I think really helped me realise, because I'm quite a yes person, like if I have an idea, I'll be like, we could do this, and I realise, and I can even go back in time and think, well, that was the human saying yes, and that was the chimp. And there have been times where I've really had to drag the other person, as it was, the other half of me, on board with this project, because I am not a person that gives up very easily. But there are certain reasons why certain projects have succeeded better than other projects, and that's because both sides were on board. And there's so many things that I wish to do with, like, dealing with meetings and negative people, that if I'd have known a few years ago... honestly, I wish I'd read this book sooner. I think that for me is the key thing, is just, if any of this interests you or if none of this interests you, it kind of doesn't matter. Just get the book and read it, because there is so much you will get out of it. And I wish I'd have started it years ago.
Yeah, I mean, for me, very much so that this side, there's elements of the training, leadership and soft skills stuff that one of the reasons I love doing it was because exactly that same experience is like, there's a set of basic skills, as I would term them, that you need, which is English or whatever your national language is, and your maths and your science and stuff that you need to understand. But then there's a set of fundamental human skills that everybody should be taught. And this is a wonderful insight into those fundamental human, understanding other people makes life so much easier set of skills that if he was going to consider writing a follow-up book, he should just write a kid's version of the book so that the children could actually learn it.
When I'm sat, because my mum being a psychologist, I felt, all my siblings would say we felt a little bit like guinea pigs growing up, but I did kind of sit there and think, thank you, because there's some inbuilt things that happen before you're 8, and I think this is a book that you must read as well if you're a parent or you're going to become a parent, because I think it would help you to bring up your children to be better humans and chimps, essentially. And to understand them better. The
chimp working for them.
Yeah, and I just kind of sat there and thought, thank you so much, Mum. Thank you.
There is actually a brilliant story in there about this idea of when a child comes up to a parent with a picture that they've painted.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And they pass over the picture, and the parent looks at it and goes, wow, that's beautiful, and then gives them a hug to say well done. That is an unintentional gremlin being built into the system that means that it's the how do we measure success thing that means you have to do something to get love from people. What you should do really is greet the child, tell them how much you love how much you love them, and then go, oh, and what have you got here?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's just that slight tweak that we all do unintentionally, not because we're trying to cause problems, but just because you didn't know. We all do it. I do it with I don't do it, but I've changed the perception and the way that I approach my nephew and nieces because of it. Because you don't want to inbuild that system into the first place, because that's all hardwired into all of us now, and it actually causes us loads of problems.
Well, the whole thing, when you first listen to that story, you think, oh, there isn't an issue with that, and then he goes back and you go, oh, that's the issue. Because both stories, the way that he tells them about this child and this drawing and putting it on the refrigerator, essentially, this whole idea of showing off what this child can do. In a normal, if you heard those stories, you think both of them were fine. But when he breaks it down, you think, oh, actually, you have just caused so many issues for that child.
Yeah, I must admit. So when I first heard him telling me through the book, when he was saying that, I was like, where's he? I was thinking, where's he going with this? This is positive reinforcement. It's all of the things us millennial parents must know and do. And then when he then described the alternative, it was a real penny drop moment.
Yeah.
And
penny drop by penny.
Oh, yes. Another podcast. No advertising, I'm sorry.
When did we say no advertising?
Well, we didn't, no.
Okay,
and actually,
good.
Dr. Stephen Peters, anything you'd like to send our way?
I really like a physical copy.
I'd like
in hardback signed.
I'm not asking for much.
We'd like some for raffling or like sending off to people that have commented on the comments.
I'm trying to work out how I can share my audiobook with more people, because unfortunately I bought it on iTunes. So I'm like, can I family share with you? Like, you need to listen to this. Like, you have to hear this book. And like literally in the last few days I've recommended it to 4 or 5 different people.
What we need is a discount link, don't we?
Yes. That's what we need. Anyway.
So
in summary, most of us think we all think you should get the book.
Yes.
Any final words, Johnny? As you were the one person that you said, oh, we should talk about the Chimp Paradox. And I was like, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, well, it's just so good. And I think, like you said earlier, even if you're only curious about it, you will get value out of it, and you'll gain an insight into yourself and an understanding that you will literally go, well, why didn't I know this before? Like, how have I gone my life this far without either A, figuring this out, or someone who had this knowledge, why didn't they pass this knowledge on to me? Because it's so useful and affects literally everything of every interaction you have with yourself and everyone else every day of your life.
And what I would add to that is, I've bumped into people when they start talking about the Chimp Paradox, or they'll mention, oh, their chimp was talking, and go, oh, you've read the Chimp Paradox, and they go, oh no, I saw a YouTube clip, or what I do recommend that you do is go on to read the book, because I can tell the difference between people who have listened to the whole audio book or read the book, or just listened to some of the sexy bits about the chimp and the human and the computer, because they completely take it out of context. And I'm not saying that they've not learned or got any value from that, and that should be at least the minimum standard. But if it does speak to you at some point, try and get your hands on the book.
So thank you for listening. We are very enthusiastic about this. So I'm sorry if this has been a little bit hard to listen to, because every time someone says something, we're like, yes, we're all very keen about it. So if you take anything away from this podcast, it's our enthusiasm for this book. Thank you, Steve Peters. Please, feel free to send us a few free copies.
And also, just in case you do wonder, because we do, when we wax lyrical about these things that we discover, we've not been paid or approached by anybody. So, hopefully that might come, but in terms of goodies and freebies and discounts that we can then pass on to you.
So that's the Throw Starfish podcast for this time. Obviously, find more podcasts on thethrowstarfish.com. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram by searching for Throw Starfish. And all the usual links to the things that we've been talking about are below. Until the next time, it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.